Okay, so in this video, I just want to review a goals table because this is kind of an important part of your single system design. I would say that you can do this for the second page of your introduction and certainly for the second page of short assignment number 2, where you have to draft an introduction for your own personal single system design. So I'd like to just take a moment to kind of go through this step by step to try to clarify any questions that you may have. So as we kind of discussed in the previous module, coming up with a conceptually defined problem is basically looking at the client concern and trying to put more of like a scientific social science kind of language to it. So here's just a vignette. John has been referred to your agency by his employer because of suspected gambling problem. You perform a multidimensional assessment to which you find that John meets DSM criteria for pathological gambling. During the assessment, John reveals that he has asked his employer for several cash advances on paychecks in order to gamble, and he expresses concerns that he may be having gambling problems. John also reports spending an average of $150 to $200 a week on gambling, and although John would like to change his behavior and he is confident he can do so, he is hesitant about whether or not he is ready to change at the moment. And even so, John is willing to discuss possible goals and counseling options. So the first step in creating the goals table is to specify what the client concern is and what brought them in today. And one step towards that is completing a multidimensional assessment. So from our vignette, the client concern real basically is just John is concerned about urges to gamble, as I suppose his employer is as well. So that's a pretty simple conceptual definition. Another thing that we can do is look to the DSM for a multidimensional assessment. Or there is, you could look for a standardized measure that looks at pathological gambling or screening for pathological gambling. So now that you've come up with a conceptually defined problem, it's time to operationalize your problem. So this process of operationalizing the problem is taking that conceptual definition and putting it into measurable terms. So an operationally defined problem becomes a target of the intervention. So an example is John's weekly score on an individualized rating scale of intensity of gambling urges. Another example might just be like number of dollars spent per week on gambling. Either one of these puts his gambling issues within quantifiable terms that are easily measurable. So with single system design, it's better to have an idea of some types of verifying sources. So we rely a lot on people's self-report, but a verifying source gives us an idea of a way to triangulate that information, whether or not it's actually true and accurate. So an example might be, in addition to the client report, might be his score on a standardized measure of gambling. So the gambling brief situational competence questionnaire might be an example. If you're so lucky, you could also try to get further information from a spouse or a coworker or a friend or a roommate or something like that that could give you an idea of what another person's objective or subjective reports are of the gambling issue. For instance, the client might say that they haven't gambled in weeks, but assuming that you have consent for your contact with a spouse, you might touch base with them and find that there's actually a different picture. So I think the verifying sources can be really helpful in this way, and not to be intrusive, but like to be supportive. So sometimes it's helpful to get family members on board too, so that you can come up with a better intervention. So step 5 was specifying client outcomes. Who will do what, to what extent, and under what circumstances. So some of this is done within the measurement and recording plan, which is something that you're going to be completing for short assignment number 3, which is to specify who's going to be completing which component of the intervention, how is recording going to be done, and when, just to really set up the single system design so that it could be replicated and clearly understood by the person who's reading it. And step 6 is to come up with intermediate goals, and step 7 is to come up with facilitative goals. So if we're going back to the goals table here that's completed, if the outcome goal is for John to remain abstinent from gambling, something that might be a step along the way that we could specify is to decrease John's urges from gambling from the previous week. So maybe a 50% reduction from his baseline score of urges to gamble. That could be an intermediate goal that could kind of help him to get to the final outcome. And a facilitative goal could be to increase his motivation and confidence in gambling refusal skills, potentially providing him with more psychoeducation on coping strategies or skills that he could use when he does have urges to gamble. And then step 8 is specifying which type of intervention you might use. And later on in the semester, we'll be talking about where to find interventions that might be most effective for a specific client problem. And I would say that although this isn't an interventions course, I am hoping that you can walk away from the course with an idea of where to find best practices or evidence-based practices for addressing your client's issue. So an example from the handout that's on the website is weekly cognitive behavioral therapy booster sessions. So maybe CBT to address gambling urges. It could be maybe mindfulness to address urges to gamble, or an act-based approach. Whatever you might find within the literature that's suggestive of the best practices for addressing the gambling use disorder. And just to reiterate the difference, because some people have issues with the difference between facilitative, intermediate, and outcome goals. So just to reiterate, if the outcome goal might be something like, for the previous vignette, is stopping gambling or getting rid of urges to gamble, that would be your outcome goal. And it's important to come up with steps along the way to that goal, kind of like a means to an end. So often, and in the examples that I'll provide you with the course, is decreasing the problematic behavior from the baseline by 50%. And a facilitative goal might be a step that you would take to make it easier for somebody to decrease their problematic behaviors.